Shavua Tov. I wanted to share a brief thought from this week's Parsha. In the Parsha, we have Moshe Rabbeinu describing to Bnei Yisrael the period of time that they were in the desert and what lessons they're supposed to get from that time. And the way that he describes it makes it seem at first as if being in the desert was very difficult. What he says is as follows. That you should remember the derech, all the path that Hashem took you through. Zeh 40 shana b'midbar. And why did Hashem do this? Leman anotcha l'nasotcha. In order to, it seems like, to make you suffer and to test you. Ladat et asher b'vocha tishmor mitzvotav imlo. To know if he would keep his mitzvot or not. V'ya'incha v'arivecha. Once again, he made you suffer and he made you hungry. And you didn't have food to eat. Instead, he gave you this man that you didn't know, that you nor your ancestors knew, to let you know that bread alone is not enough for people to survive, right? So things were very difficult. You really didn't have anything to eat, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu provided us with man. And then the very next pasuk, Moshe continues to say, Simlatcha lo valta me'alecha v'raglecha lo valteka zer 40 shana. That your clothing's condition did not deteriorate, right? It stayed as in good condition as at the beginning, and also that your feet, your legs weren't damaged, weren't harmed by walking in the desert. Normally, if you're walking in the desert for a long time, so your very nice clothes will turn into rags, and your feet will get all sorts of sores and get very very uncomfortable. Right? It's hot in the desert. It's sandy. It's not easy. But that didn't happen. Right? Hashem took care of you. He made sure that your clothes were going to be okay, your feet were going to be okay. And it seems odd, this whole description, right? Because at the beginning, it seems like Moshe is saying about how horrible it was in the desert, right? There wasn't food. It was so difficult. God made you suffer. He made you hungry because he wanted to test you. He wanted to know if you'd keep his mitzvot or not. And then one pasuk later, Moshe writes about how, Hashem made sure everything was okay. You didn't have to worry, right? Your clothes were great, right? You're walking around in a suit and everything was fine. Your feet, there was no blisters, no everything, right? You were walking on clouds. So it's confusing, right? Is Moshe trying to say that the desert was very hard, or is Moshe trying to say that the desert wasn't hard because Hashem was taking care of us? It doesn't make much sense. But I was thinking about it, and I think that part of the idea is really that being in the desert, really any situation that we encounter in life, there's definitely things that are objectively difficult, right? In the desert, they didn't have food; they had to rely purely on the man. But together with that, with often things being objectively difficult, there are also things that can be objectively good in any situation. For example, Bnei Yisrael, right, that they didn't have, when they were in the desert, that their clothes were okay, their feet were okay. But the question is, what do we focus on? Right, Bnei Yisrael, over and over again in the stories of the desert, there's many situations where Dor HaMidbar choose to focus on what they're lacking. Right, they complain about what they don't have in the desert, what they used to have in Mitzrayim, what they don't yet have because they're not in Eretz Yisrael. That the focus is very much on the bad. And less on the good, less on this idea, wow, Kadosh Baruch Hu took us out of slavery in Mitzrayim, we have a leader, we have his Torah, right? They don't focus on that. They instead tend to focus on the bad. So part of the question here, that this dynamic that's going on in Moshe's description, is that we need to have this realization that there's good and bad, and we need to be able to focus on the good. And I think that's part of the message that Moshe is coming up with, Moshe is trying to express here. But I think that over and above that, I want to take it a little bit of a step further. That in any situation that has good and bad, it's true, it's probably makes us happier and sometimes more well-adjusted to focus on the good, while not ignoring the bad, but just not focusing on the bad. But I think that what Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to Bnei Yisrael is that even in the bad situations, it's also a question, the bad aspects of it. The question is, how do we relate to those difficulties, right? Do we relate to it as something that's bad, something that's not good, that we should be complaining about it, or instead of focusing on something bad, do we focus on it as a challenge? Right, so even though we could say V'ya'ancha v'yarivecha, that God made us suffer, He made us hungry, that's just our perspective. That could have been our perspective on it, and often was our perspective on it. But really, the reason that Hashem did it was Leman Nasotcha, was in order to test us. The Ramban elsewhere in the Torah explains that the word nisayon, we might think of it normally as a test, right? As sort of a pass-fail, right? It's checking how you did so far. But that's not what nisayon is. The man nasotcha, a test, is the Ramban explains, to show nes, a banner. That a nisayon is supposed to take a person and raise them up, right? It's supposed to take this potential that they have and hopefully help them actualize, help them realize that potential, and help them become a better person. So even though the fact that Bnei Israel didn't have food in the desert was difficult, right, and they could have viewed it, and they did view it as suffering, as difficult, as making them hungry, that wasn't what was behind it, right? In other words, even this bad thing was actually a challenge. It was actually an opportunity for Bnei Israel to rise above their physical difficulty and recognize the fact that ki lo al alechem levado yichya adam, that bread is not the only thing that a person needs, that it's not just enough to have physical sustenance, but that the goal is to go much further than that. And I think that that's a message that we can have in any situation in life, especially in these times, in terms of the fact that when we encounter a challenge as well, we can, number one, choose to focus on the good or choose to focus on the bad. And even if we do choose to focus on the quote unquote bad, the question is, how do we approach it? Do we complain about it? Do we view it as suffering, as difficulty, or not only doing that, but then taking that and realizing that it's a challenge, right? It's something that we can take and figure out a way to actually, Be'ezrat Hashem, come better out of it at the other end. So I think that that's the challenge that Moshe Rabbeinu gives us in this week's parsha, and I hope that we can, God willing, rise to that challenge. Shavua Tov.